My name is Caroline Spillane. I'm the Director General of Engineers Ireland. It's my great pleasure on behalf of the Council, the Executive Board, and the members and the staff of Engineers Ireland to welcome Rachel, who is the President of ICE, to deliver her presidential address. I would also like to congratulate and thank Keith Elliott, who is Chair of the ICE Republic of Ireland branch, for all of the work that he's done on bringing us to the point of having this address delivered today. And indeed, I'd like to thank my colleague, Maureen McIngus, who has done so much work to try and support Keith and his colleagues on the committee to bring about this event. There's been a very long-standing tradition of collaboration between Engineers Ireland and the ICE, and today is another great example of how we see that collaboration happening in practice. In previous years, and I know Bradley is on this call as well, we've had some absolutely fantastic events that have taken place in Engineers Ireland with former ICE presidents, like, for example, Sir John Armit and Robert Mayer, where we've been able to identify areas of shared concern and interest between Engineers Ireland and the ICE, and have worked towards talking them through, developing common and shared views and positions. And just in advance of the presidential address, we had the benefit of having such a round table, but with the addition of our GB branch as well, which was a fantastic opportunity. So today is a very special day, and if we were in Engineers Ireland and Clyde Road, there would be a great buzz in the building associated with this address. But unfortunately, we're online, and that isn't possible. But one of the great things about being online is the opportunity for so many people to join the event. And I know that we have a very significant number of people on the webinar this afternoon and joining from all parts of Ireland, the UK, and across the world. So I really look forward to hearing Rachel's address, and I'm now going to hand over to our president, Professor Orla Feely, who's going to introduce Rachel and give a little bit more context to the address that's going to be spoken about this afternoon. Orla.
Thank you, Caroline. And thanks everybody for joining us today. You're all very, very welcome. Like Caroline, I'm delighted that we're here together for this address by Rachel Skinner, the President of the Institution of Civil Engineers, to its members here in Ireland and also to the members of Engineers Ireland. Rachel, you're very welcome here to Dublin online, and thank you so much for joining us here today. I also welcome the members of both our institutes to this address, which I think is a really important, as Caroline had said, and a long-standing positive collaboration between our institutes, which share so many common purposes, including supporting our members to be the best engineers they can be throughout their careers. Now, I know that as an organisation, the Institution of Civil Engineers has put decarbonisation at the heart of its agenda, alongside climate resilience, productivity, digital and other key transformation strands. And Rachel, I know that it is your determination as ICE President to have this focus on decarbonisation in particular as part of your presidency. As you say in your really excellent and inspiring video, Shaping Zero, you want to ensure that engineers understand the net zero challenge and will meaningfully contribute to reaching the UK's net zero goal. I've had the pleasure of viewing Shaping Zero, which is a really, really excellent and very compelling piece of work. And I know many of our attendees here today have seen it. Those who haven't yet had a chance, I really encourage you to do so. At a personal level, Rachel, I was delighted to see Tim Chapman, a former classmate of mine in University College Dublin, one of those whom you interviewed as part of your work. And one point that you make there is that worldwide infrastructure can be linked to around 70% of carbon emissions, both directly and indirectly, and that our industry is full of people who understand that and who have a personal and professional stake in this issue. I fully agree that as engineers, we need to rethink everything that we do through, as you put it, a carbon lens. Now, just before I ask Rachel to speak, I want to provide some background information from her extremely distinguished career. Rachel is the 156th president of the ICE and is an executive director in transport at WSP, leading engineering consultancy firm. She's a patron of Women in Transport, a not-for-profit, having been one of its founding board members since 2005. She's a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, a chartered engineer, and a chartered transport planner. Rachel chairs the carbon stream of the Infrastructure Client Group and was recently invited to join the external expert panel established to support the UK Department for Transport's acceleration unit that is focused on a faster, better and greener recovery beyond COVID-19. She served 2 years as an Infrastructure Commissioner for Scotland from late 2018. In 2016, Rachel was listed as one of the Telegraph's inaugural UK top 50 influential women in engineering. In 2017, she was named the most distinguished winner and best woman civil engineer at the Women in Civil Engineering Awards. And in 2019, she was confirmed by the Financial Times as one of the UK's top 100 women in engineering. Rachel has authored, scripted and hosted publications and films on topics including Shaping Zero, about net carbon for infrastructure, which is the basis for her address today, and Making Better Places on placemaking and future mobility. Rachel, as a working engineer, is involved with strategic projects for clients across the public and private sectors, including leadership of a growing portfolio of future mobility projects in the UK and overseas. So Rachel, I know you're going to have much to tell us about now, and I'm delighted to introduce you to address us.
Oh, thank you very much. I feel you all know me better than I know me right now, but there we go. That's all very good. So thank you both Caroline and Paula for that introduction there, and thank you to all of you for joining in with this event today. It is an absolute pleasure to be here, although of course here is somewhat virtual still. I did actually manage last week, somewhat unexpectedly, to actually do the first in-person conference speaker slot with an actual real audience all year, which was quite a shock, but I think it may just be a one-off as it turns out, but there we go. We'll see what unfolds next. Gosh, yes, I'm going to talk, I think, around two specific things today, both aspects to do with my presidential theme, as you would expect. So first of all, I'm kind of assuming that the vast majority of you have seen the Shaping Zero film that went out as part of my inauguration at the beginning of November last year. But I want to just talk a little bit more around my theme and some pieces to do with, I suppose, some of the learning that I've kind of picked up through this year, some of the conversations I've been having with people, and some of the new ways I'm finding to try to describe just how utterly important and urgent this is in terms of getting this much more right when it comes to climate action for civil engineers in particular. But I then want to go on, and I just want to spend a few minutes of time while I've got you all talking a bit more around what the ICE has been doing more generally that relates to my theme, and what will continue to happen once I hand over the, I guess, the presidential baton to Ed McCann at the beginning of November this year, which of course now is just in a few short weeks. I cannot believe how quickly the time has gone, despite the fact I haven't actually really sort of been anywhere in a physical sense of any great significance. It has truly flown in terms of the number of discussions and conversations, the amount of interest that's been in this thing, which is just so exciting because it's kind of the whole point of picking it in the first place. So as I know you all know, not just from the introductions this morning, but also through, I hope, things you've been seeing from the ICE over the course of the last, I guess, 11 or nearly 11 months now, my whole year as ICE president has essentially just been laser focused on just one thing. It's quite a big and ambitious theme that I called Shaping Zero, as I'm sure most of you are aware. And in short, it's just all about the crucial importance of focusing in now and at some speed and with serious effort and energy and all the rest of it, but focusing in on climate action and the role that we as civil engineers, as infrastructure experts more generally, and just as sort of professionals in that sphere, the role that we all need to play and need to take responsibility for all over the world if we're actually going to get to a place where we can genuinely say that we are able to secure a net zero carbon position. But at the same time, and this is something that's come through, I think, ever more clearly over the course of my whole year, is also to make sure that we remember there's another job to do as well. It is about decarbonisation, it is about trying to get to a net zero carbon balance, but it's also about defending against the onward impacts of climate change that we are beginning to see all around us, and which absolutely are still to play out over the coming decades. And actually, when you put all of that into one very large bucket and consider what it actually means for the world around us, for civilization, for the future of all of us and our future generations on the planet, it is absolutely key to our long run survival, frankly, on the planet. And I know some people probably think I'm overstating that, but actually it genuinely is the number one threat that is out there, which if we continue to ignore it, really will actually be something that effectively wipes out any potential for a future that we have over the slightly longer run. So standing back from my theme and just, I guess, thinking a little bit more deeply around why this matters, and those of you who've seen my Shaping Zero film will recognise some of this piece here. It strikes me that we as engineers generally, and it really doesn't matter which sector you work in and exactly whether you consider yourself to be at the heart of that engineering side of things or you know, on some of the technical fringes, or indeed pointing into other sectors as well, we have a massive responsibility and a huge opportunity when it comes to climate change. And that is because around about 70% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions can be related back in some way, shape or form, so both directly and indirectly, to infrastructure. And that is very simply because of the way that we plan, we design and we build things today, so the processes we use when we create new assets, but also because of the behaviours that we effectively enable because that infrastructure exists. So everything that's already out there and everything else that we might well choose to invest in as we go forward. So every single infrastructure asset, whether it's new or whether it's old, had a carbon impact when it was first built, the capital carbon impact of that thing. And most of them do continue to have an impact now as we use those assets and systems every single day. So that's a mix of operational carbon and user carbon. And those emissions matter because they are the primary cause of climate change in the world today. And I have to say that as the year has gone on, I kind of knew it was well timed. I was very keen that no ICE president in front of me in the succession queue was going to get there first. I was keen to be the first one to talk about this, which has actually been the case. But it's become obvious to me as the year has gone on that actually the impacts of climate change, even within just the last few weeks and months, have just made themselves so obvious. Whether you look at the fatal floods in New York or Germany or China, whether you look at fatal heat waves and wildfires in the Western US and Canada, whether you just look even closer to here, and when you realise that actually the August records from the Met Office in the UK show us that actually this summer has been a full degree warmer than average, which perhaps might not feel like it depending on the microclimate that each one of us has actually experienced, but it is true that overall it's a full degree warmer than average in terms of the records that we've obviously been keeping for some time. And indeed we've also had round about half as much more rain than we would expect, and much of it delivered in torrential downpours, which of course again might well feel like a very, very different picture to what we were used to and certainly what we would have experienced maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. So it strikes me that these sorts of things are not minor, insignificant little changes, and these are not places that we can somehow sort of rationalise as being places we shouldn't worry about. This is actually right here and it's right now. And what we have to understand is that these huge global climate systems take decades to adjust. So actually things that we did as much as 30 years ago are the things that are now starting to actually have an effect on our world around us now. So this is not a system that's standing still, and an awful lot of the impacts are actually baked in. So we really need to start to think about what we want to do differently from now. Even if we can't see the impacts of what we do tomorrow, we certainly can be more sure that we are taking the responsible action, that we're actually doing the right thing in terms of trying to change the way that the world will continue, those global systems will continue to operate in the decades to come. So to me, it is absolutely the responsibility of civil engineers to acknowledge and to stop causing this sort of harm to the wider world around us, and indeed to help as best we possibly can to put right the harm of the past, while we also, as I said before, defend against the impacts that actually lie ahead in terms of onward climate change. And I find it fascinating talking to people, and obviously, as we heard just now, one thing I've done this year, even if I haven't been able to travel around, is talk to an awful lot of people. I do find it fascinating how very often And maybe it's human nature. We tend to think of this as a problem that, you know, perhaps doesn't quite apply to us, or that somehow working in an adjacent field might be the thing that's going to save us, or we look out at technology that may or may not exist in the future and almost hope, I suppose, that that might be the magic bullet that helps us to get out of this mess that essentially we've put ourselves in. But actually, I think in terms of the responsibility piece, and this is just my personal view, I would be really interested to know whether you will agree with me or not. I would say that every single one of us listening, you know, within this event today, but anybody working in the broad infrastructure space has absolutely no reason to think that, you know, their own work is somehow exempt from these impacts, or it doesn't have any impact. Because actually, I think, if anything, if people are thinking they aren't somehow a part of this problem, I would say you need to think again. You need to think again, because actually everybody in every role and at every level is part of the problem right now. And actually we all have an impact and a part to play in starting to sort that out. So the challenge really is that, of course, within the infrastructure space, we've got such a huge range of different expert disciplines and technical professionalisms and all the rest of it. It is really, really difficult for anybody to cook up a single list of, right, these are the things we need to do. But what we can do, you know, as experts in these different and very specific fields that we all are, we all need to just take the time to think about, right, what can we each do in terms of finding the carbon, in terms of figuring out, you know, what the answer is in terms of how to cut it, but also how to make what we do much more resilient to the future impacts that we can expect to come along. And I guess the trick really, and the thing I would love to feel that I'm hopefully helping a lot of people to start to do, is just to think about what that change might look like from each of your individual points of view, and then to really just say, well, you know, what is stopping you from getting on and making progress in terms of that contribution you can actually make when it comes to the carbon impact, climate impact of what we each do. And I find it really interesting, actually, and just doing a little bit of digging around, a bit of research before talking to all of you today in terms of the Irish context on all of this, because obviously there is so much similar and shared ambition here in terms of, for example, the 2050 net zero target and so on. And it's clear that there is work progressing. There are projects coming through which are beginning to think differently, which have been beginning to, I suppose, explain themselves differently, tell a different story in terms of how important this particular aspect, this carbon lens, is on, first of all, what sort of solutions are now appropriate, but secondly, the outcomes and the impacts of what we actually do and how we can seek to change that. And of course, it's great to see that beginning to happen, but there is just such a long way to go. And that's the bit that increasingly I think is terrifying me as this year goes on, because I kind of knew this obviously wasn't going to be a one-year task. You can't just stand up and say, right, everybody think about this differently and then magically see it all unfold. But the scale of what we have to do, the speed we have to do it at, I think is ever more daunting, and I guess ever more exciting as well, in terms of just trying to figure out how we get things much more right. So I guess if it helps, and this is something I've been finding, I think has been helping in various different conversations and conferences and similar that I've been speaking over the course of the year, it feels that it would help if we each start to split what we need to do into two different parts. And the first part, in terms of a bundle of actions, is to do with our attack strategy. This is the plan to get to net zero, the plan to cut carbon from everything and anything across all that we do in a professional sense, also a personal sense as well, but to bring through new solutions that allow us not just to take carbon, for example, out of materials that we might otherwise have specified, but also just to process much more carbon out of the atmosphere as quickly as we possibly can. All of that relates to decarbonisation. All of that relates to mitigation of the impacts of climate change. All of that relates to, as I say, this sort of attack strategy on climate change. We have got to do it because we are so far the wrong side of the carbon balance right now. We are so far from a net zero balance that we have to bring down the levels of carbon that are essentially running through all of these different infrastructure systems. There's no way we'll get to net zero without this attack strategy piece. As I mentioned, because infrastructure at the moment can be traced back to roughly 70% of the global emissions that are out there, actually we need to find ways, in my view at least as infrastructure experts, essentially to break this addiction to carbon that we have sort of accidentally walked ourselves into ever since the Industrial Revolution, and certainly since the 1970s and onwards, when levels of carbon that have been associated with those systems have just gone up and up and up. So it might seem, as I'm talking to you, that what I'm therefore advocating is that we stop doing some of the things that we're doing. Perhaps we say we won't build things anymore, or that we have to reach, you know, some sort of extreme position in a way that is entirely unreasonable. I would just want to kind of head that one off at the pass, though, if I'm perfectly honest, because I'm not saying for a moment that we can't build things, that we can't invest in infrastructure, that we can't seek to find ways to actually make this work, and to make sure the function of all of our infrastructure systems actually continue to be as they need to be over time. But what it does mean, though, in investing in infrastructure, in deciding to build or to change things or to reuse things, whatever it might be, we have to absolutely get better at understanding the impact of what we do, and we have to find ways to reduce down those carbon impacts of what we do as quickly as we possibly can. And once we've understood, let's say the original impact might have been this much, and then you find a way to bring that down a certain amount, that's fantastic. But if you know you've still got this residual impact hanging out you know, within a particular project or investment or a system, whatever it might be, we are going to have to take responsibility for mitigating that impact, for finding ways to offset or to put right, essentially, those overall impacts, because otherwise we can't, as a whole industry, claim that we are doing all that we genuinely can to get towards that net zero carbon position. So all of that is to do with the attack strategy, just bringing down those levels of carbon, figuring out ways to get towards net zero. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a second great big bundle of actions, which is, I guess, until some point in this year, was sort of playing almost like a sort of poor relation type role in terms of all these pieces to do with climate action, because there was so much noise around net zero, certainly over the last couple of years at least. We also, though, have to remember this defence strategy, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. It's the other side of the same coin. And it's also incredibly relevant to all of our technical and personal worlds when we actually stop and think about it. And essentially, the reason why this defence strategy is going to matter much, much more perhaps than we previously realised is because we are too late to rely just on our attack strategy on carbon, the thing I was just describing, because actually climate action is going to need us to play a defensive game as well. And so this is where you hear people talking around adaptation and resilience and those sorts of words. This is all to do with our defence strategy, the pieces that will help us to live with a world where the climate is different, where perhaps things are a little warmer, where we'll experience more frequent, more intense climate events and natural disasters all over the place of all different types, depending on context. Those global shifts in our systems, as I say, have a 30-year feedback loop going on. And so we know we have at least 30 years of a worsening climate ahead of us. And every single day that we don't take sufficient action to mitigate or attack this change actually builds the scale of the problem and the length of time over which we're going to have to keep on defending communities and livelihoods all over the world, which I, as I said before, find utterly terrifying. And I find it frankly strange that we don't all seem to have got a grip on the scale of the change that we're really going to have to be dealing with here. So in terms of what we have to do with infrastructure around that, it strikes me that across all of our different sectors and across all of the stages of the life cycle where we're thinking about what we're going to do, what are we going to invest in, what are we going to change, what do we want to retain, all of that side of things, we have to start to think again through that sort of climate lens around how our existing assets are going to cope with a changing climate, and how anything else we introduce to those systems will be able to cope as well, because we simply can't just fall back on, well, we've always done it this way, that's always been okay in the past, because actually that might well not be okay as we go forward. And at the moment, it strikes me that we are nowhere near ready for some of that side of things. And I think all the way through the whole of the life cycle, there's a lot of thinking that could be built in. So coming around to, I guess, stepping away from those attack and the defence strategies, but hopefully that's, I guess, given some thoughts in terms of where anybody, regardless of role, regardless of area of technical expertise, could really start to engage with this. The other couple of points I want to leave you with today are, first of all, the fact that speed matters. So the success or failure of all of our efforts towards climate action, the success or failure actually of our long-run future on the planet, will hang in part or large part on our ability as infrastructure professionals to take real advantage of all of this change that's going on, but to respond with changes to the whole of our infrastructure systems at speed. So we've spent, well, decades 70 odd years ignoring this issue, really. We've been largely blind to it as it's crept up on us. And so now we are in danger of hoping that it will just continue to creep along and there won't be any major changes and so on. But actually now really is the moment when we have to really shoulder that responsibility and just help as fast as we can in terms of both those attack and the defence pieces of that climate action jigsaw, I suppose. I think where the speed element for me gets truly terrifying is that we're essentially lulling ourselves into a bit of a false sense of security, I think, even maybe around some of these 2050 targets. 2050 is simply a year that we've put on this in more of a political sense than anything else, in terms of being a year by which time it's reasonable for us to have changed. But we need to remember that's not actually our choice to make. It's entirely possible that all these impacts we've been merrily having all over the world, you know, for past decades may actually already have taken us past the tipping point that will fundamentally alter the world's climate systems for good. So even if we do all the right things by 2050 and we sort of feel we've ticked the net zero box, hooray, we've done it, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that things are just going to go back to the way they were. So actually, to me, in terms of the speed side of things, we have to do everything we can and redouble our efforts to decarbonise and to try and seek that genuine net zero balance as fast as we possibly can, as well as building in that resilience bit wherever we can. But of course, that's what makes the whole thing so exciting from the point of view of engineering, because we are at the heart of all of this, because we have such a large impact and we have influence across such a large proportion of those carbon impacts across the world today. It essentially means that we are at the heart of both the attack and the defence strategies for climate action as we go forward. So to me, we are not going to get a better opportunity to redefine what we stand for, to make our roles much more visible, to continue to show the world through action and not just words that what we do really, really matters. And I think we all know that anyway, but what better opportunity are we going to look for in terms of actually trying to explain that to other people? It just strikes me that the moment sort of has to be now. So I suppose I kind of hope that sparking off all sorts of thoughts in each of your minds around exactly, you know, where you might each continue or start to do things differently. Ultimately, it simply comes down to finding the carbon in your work, getting creative about how to remove it, reduce it, mitigate it in terms of the tax strategy, and just to think about what to do in terms of that defensive side of things and how to really make that work much better, and how to make sure that any changes we make to any of our infrastructure systems going forward will help us to defend more, not to resist the effects of climate change, but to cope with the effects of climate change as we go forward. So that sort of brings me around reasonably neatly to the big question that I've been asking anybody who'll listen, frankly, all year, which those of you who've seen the film will be aware of. So when it comes to climate action, I'm simply asking, what are you going to do? And that brings me very neatly in terms of my own answer to that, bringing me around to the second part of what I wanted to speak to you about briefly today, which is what the ICE is already doing and also what we're going to do next. So you've already heard a little bit around this actually in terms of the introductory comments that you heard there in part from Orla, right back at the beginning also, I think partly from Caroline as well. So the first thing we've done already, and this has been in motion for a little while now, is we've put climate action right at the top of the ICE strategic agenda for the next 5 years. So both the piece around decarbonisation, the pieces around net zero, the attack strategy, but also the resilience bit, the defensive bit. And as you've already heard, the other things also remain on our list of, you know, important strategic areas and directions to take. So things to do with productivity, to do with digital, to do with safety and so on. All of that now forms a group of around about 6 headline areas where we want to make sure we're making clear, integrated progress in terms of that strategic direction for civil engineering overall. More specifically in the carbon and the climate action space, some of you will be aware that last year we launched a thing called the Carbon Project, which is now evolving into a community advisory board for decarbonisation and also another one to do with climate resilience. So out of that are coming things like the ICE's annual State of the Nation report. We had one already on net zero that was last year, and this year we have another one to do with climate action, and many of the things actually I've been talking about there in terms of the influence, the responsibility that civil engineers have to directly and indirectly make a difference in terms of carbon emissions through the whole of the infrastructure life cycle. We're also leading the update of a new PAS 2080 standard. Some of you will know there is a document called PAS 2080 which already deals with carbon management, but it needs an update, and so that process is now underway. Obviously linked in with the Standards Institute, but then it's also being led and authored by the ICE, so that will be hopefully coming out sometime next year. Just last week, we launched a brand new program to celebrate some of the people who are doing a fantastic job to demonstrate how they're cutting carbon from their civil engineering work. So we called it the Carbon Champions Programme. So we now have 27 officially accredited carbon champions out there. If any of you have projects where you have thought hard around the carbon impact of what you would have done, and you thought about ways to cut that, and you actually quantified it, and you can demonstrate it through some sensible thinking, whether that's first principles or through any other tools, we absolutely want to hear about that, because we're very keen to build this community of carbon champions as quickly as we possibly can. The academic course content for the university courses that the ICE accredits as being appropriate for different levels of professional qualification. We're making sure that the next generation of civil engineers will know all about these issues, and they will understand things like sustainability and the sustainable development goals about climate action, the role that infrastructure and engineering need to play in addressing the issue. I find it staggering actually that it would be entirely possible today to study civil engineering without really touching on some of these issues at all. And clearly from everything I've said, I think that's not going to be acceptable going forward. It's an urgent change we need to make. So from the next cohort of graduate intake or undergraduate intake, those changes are already coming through, which is fantastic. We are updating all the pieces to do with the ICE qualification processes, making sure that the sustainability attribute, which has been there for some years, is one that fully fits with essentially the state of the world as it is today, and make sure that, again, anybody wanting to come through, whether it's a technical, corporate or chartered level, actually that they're able to speak about the links between what they do and the bigger picture of climate change and the need for these issues to be fully articulated and clear to everybody. It doesn't mean that everybody has to be a climate science expert. It just means we have to be able to relate what we do in a technical sense to all of these bigger issues. We're going to be doing similar for the fellowship of the ICE as well, making sure that the influential senior people within the industry are also on board with the new language, with the new ways of discussing things, and are not out there promoting potential solutions which actually potentially do an awful lot of harm in the world without thinking a little bit more deeply, should we say, around actually what we could do to start to mitigate and put those impacts right. So I think maybe last on that list, though, and maybe most exciting for me, though, is that I'm afraid, perhaps, I should probably apologise for this rather than anything else, for the first time ever, we have decided we're going to link together the presidential themes for people who hold the role into next year and the year after and the year after and so on. The ICE system is very organised, so we actually know who the next 3 or 4 presidents are going to be. And for the first time ever, we have an agreement that everybody's themes for not just my year, but the next 4 years as well, will all be linked together to do with this bigger picture around climate action. They won't be the same, because different people want to have their own take on what that actually means to them and what they want to talk about in a specific sense. But there is just so much to do that actually we've got that agreement already that each one of them will take this forward as we go on. So I believe I'm right in saying this is the first time ever that we've had, I guess, you know, a sequence of ICE presidents who actually have agreed in advance that they will all be talking along similar lines, and we can really help to make this theme stick and to keep the momentum rolling, to keep the change coming over a 5-year period in total, and maybe even longer than that. Who knows? It's just we don't know who the people are beyond that. And I do actually genuinely think that that's really quite important and exciting, just in terms of keeping the attention on this issue instead of flitting around and potentially forgetting about some of the important work that has to be done. So I think at that point I will stop talking, because I'm really happy to pick up any questions that might come through as a result of what I've talked about there. I hope I've given you a bit of a flavour there in terms of what I'm all about where we've got to so far, what's still to come, and not least the enormity of this topic. But to close, of course, I have got to ask you the big question of the year one more time, because if I don't, it would be something that I've managed to do in every other group, and I'll be very sorry if I don't manage to do that right now. So I guess, as I said before, the big question of the year is when it comes to climate action, what are you going to do? And if you aren't already doing it, what's stopping you? Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was wonderful. It was passionate, it was inspiring, and you conveyed your message so well to us. So thank you very much for that. In terms of what we are doing in Engineers Ireland, we're doing a lot. We have a very significant contribution to the sustainability agenda, and as do our members. So some of the things that we're doing, first of all, just in our vision statement, we say that we are a community of creative professionals delivering sustainable solutions for society. So right up there, front and centre in our vision statement is sustainability. Under the environmental and social obligations of our Code of Ethics, we say that our members must promote the principles and practices of sustainable development and the needs of present and future generations. We approved on the 18th of July 2020 a sustainability framework to align our sustainability actions with our core objectives, and we have 4 headings under which we do that. There's Learn, which is about professional formation and development, and that includes accreditation of courses, which you described very well, also CPD. Live, which is operations, the way we run ourselves as an organisation. Are we living up to our principles in terms of our commitment to sustainability? There's Lead. This is about advocacy and regulation. We want to make sure that we are advocating for this agenda nationally and internationally. And also Link. That's about how we collaborate with others to advance this agenda. And in our approach, we look at climate mitigation. So that's your defence, if you like, the need to reduce emissions related to our buildings, our vehicles, our infrastructure, and so on. And also climate adaptation, the resilience of our built and natural environment in the face of extreme weather. So that's the defence. And also then the attack is the need to reduce the emissions to protect our biodiversity and to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we as an organisation are passionately committed to this agenda. And then your question, of course, transmits to our members. What are all they doing to advance sustainability? And we know that they are doing it in a huge diversity of ways. We hear about this through our interactions. And I think your point about carbon champions is a really good one, that we as an institution can champion those from among our members who are taking extraordinary steps to progress this agenda, and we can support them in what they're doing. Because we know on the one hand, you're absolutely right, there is huge awareness now of this agenda. Just yesterday, one of my sons was watching the Chelsea Spurs match. It was branded as Game Zero, about how the game could itself be net zero in terms of carbon emissions. I didn't look into the justification for how they did it, but certainly they got their branding there. And my Chelsea supporting son was delighted that Spurs took the Game Zero message to heart in their scoring. But more broadly, so we know that there is a commitment. We know you can't open a newspaper, open a website, turn on your television news anywhere this year without seeing in the most evident of fashions how this agenda is now shaping the way in which the planet is living. So everybody is aware of this, but to convert that into action is not so easy. And I always think it's interesting to compare and contrast with the pandemic. So the pandemic, we immediately saw, now obviously different, there were different phases that we all went through in our various local regions. But first of all, generally it was characterised by an immediate, urgent and focused response by government, who were able to open the purse strings and take actions that they would never normally have contemplated, by industry, by all actors who immediately rolled up their sleeves and said, okay, what can we do here? And by society that pulled together in a way that we had never seen before in our lifetimes. And there was also a trust in the science, an understanding that we needed to take certain research, engineering, scientific steps in order to get us through this. And we've seen how that has worked to really spectacular effect. If you compare and contrast to the pandemic, we need much of the same. We need that focused action, that whole of system response, that trust in the science and engineering. But the impacts now are so much greater, and the actions that are required are correspondingly so much greater of us all. I think you're right to highlight the fact that the feedback loops here are so slow. And compared to the pandemic, where one could see local response quite quickly when certain actions were taken, there is much less evidence of local impacts of the actions that we are taking in response to climate change. So it is difficult, no matter how much we understand the enormity of this agenda, the fact that time is running out, the fact that it is incumbent on all of us to make a response. Behaviourally, I think it's really difficult to bring governments, to bring society, to bring industry with us, to take the really dramatic steps that we now know are needed. So I think that's why actions such as yours are so important, to speak from a position of authority and to tell people, to remind us all just how enormous the stakes are here and how important it is that every single one of us takes it upon ourselves to respond. So I think that your talk here today and your Shaping Zero video will have inspired all those who have seen it to think about specifically what we're going to do to further this agenda, which is so vital for the future of humanity on this planet. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you to Keith Elliott for organising so well. And Keith, I'm now going to pass back to you to continue the response.
Thank you, Orla, and thank you indeed to Rachel for your most inspiring address. I would like to invite two more speakers to share their thoughts on Rachel's address. Our first speaker is Susan Mcgarry, Managing Director of Ecosam Ireland Limited, which is part of the Ecosam Group, a major supplier of low-carbon cement to the construction industry. Susan is a chartered engineer and has worked for Ecosam for 9 years in a variety of roles, being appointed Managing Director of the Irish operation early last year. She is passionate about the environment and sustainability and is a leader in the drive for a greener construction industry. Prior to her move into the MD role at Ecosam Ireland, as Ecosam's European Sustainability Manager, she designed and implemented the group sustainability strategy and report. She is also well known for her advocacy for women in engineering and devotes a considerable amount of her time to promoting careers in the industry to young women across the country. In addition to all of that, Susan also finds time to be a guest lecturer in Trinity College Dublin and Technical University Dublin, and is also a qualified lead green associate. Susan.
Thank you, Keith. That was a very serious introduction. Thank you very much. So Rachel, it's an honour to be here today to respond to your presentation as a member of Engineers Ireland. As a nice lead in from what Keith just mentioned about my advocacy for women engineers, women in engineering, I think it's worth mentioning that I sit as the industry liaison officer with the newly formed Women in Engineering Group of Engineers Ireland. So we set up in January 2021. And the main aim of the group will be to get women into the profession, to get them to stay in the profession, and to get them to return to the profession. And I couldn't think of a better role model than yourself to show women what a rewarding and interesting career you can really make within this profession. So thank you for that. So your words today and the Shaping Zero video, they really act as a call to arms in the fight against climate change to all engineers from any discipline. So Ireland's climate bill in 2019 marked a real shift in the industry. So engineers have long been familiar with the need for efficient design, durability, and the need to address the environmental impact of building. But for the first time in our history as a nation, we have signed climate limits into law. So now, as of today, we're a couple of weeks away from having the first carbon budget. So we still don't know what this will look like for the construction industry, how far it will go, but we do know that this is the most ambitious ever taken to address emissions nationally here. So I'm the Managing Director of Ecosam, as Keith said. We supply low carbon cement and technical solutions to help decarbonise the cement sector. So because of this role, I'm keenly aware of the embodied carbon aspect of the built environment sector. So I've been talking about embodied carbon for about 10 years now. And at the start, people didn't really listen all that much, but I'm happy to say that has changed significantly in the past few years. So embodied carbon in Ireland accounts for about 4.1 million tonnes of CO2. It's the single largest contributor to the built environment sector. And of that 4.1 million tonnes, cement alone accounts for 2.85 million tonnes of carbon. So nationally, that equates to 4% of our national greenhouse gas emissions, just from one product. So when you have a carbon budget, which is here to reduce emissions nationally, it makes sense to target a heavy hitting industry such as cement, especially when there are solutions available to make lower carbon versions like you're doing in the UK and like the rest of Europe has done. So now the concrete and cement sector employ nearly 7,000 people in Ireland, and it should be protected. However, if it won't change and move forward, it's at risk. So carbon prices are soaring. We all know about the material costs increasing, energy is increasing. and we're at risk of no longer being competitive. So our cement exports, our precast concrete exports, they'll be too high cost and too high carbon. So prioritizing low carbon cements and materials and getting the industry to move forward with reduced emissions is the only way to future-proof this industry. So this is one example of one material that I just happen to know very, very well, but the same can be true of pretty much all construction materials. So yes, we need manufacturers to change their processes, but we also need to drive them and allow them to do so. So we need standards to open up to allow new technologies and novel materials in. We need to train our workforce in modern methods of construction. We need life cycle analysis to become common practice. And we need EPDs to be standard requirement of all products. Now, all of this together does sound like a huge feat, but professional bodies like Engineers Ireland and the ICE, as outlined by both Orla and Rachel today, with thousands of motivated members, can make this happen. So it's often said that the biggest masterstroke of the fossil fuel industry was making individuals believe that they can make a difference to climate change. Well, individually, engineers, as outlined by Rachel just now, can make a difference, and collectively can lead the entire national construction industry forward into a low carbon economy. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you, Rachel, for speaking today. And I wish you all the best for your final time as presidency, or your last few months as president.
Thank you very much, Susan. Very well said. Our second speaker, PJ Rodden, is well known to many of you. He's a strategic business consultant, chartered engineer and environmental manager, and a member of the Institute of Directors. He recently founded Ingus Consulting Limited and was previously director of RPS Group. As project director, PJ has been responsible for the planning, design, procurement, stakeholder engagement, and construction management of some of Ireland's largest infrastructure projects, up to individual project values of 1.3 billion across the energy, waste management, environment, transport, water, utilities, and urban development sectors. Over the course of his long career, PJ has held many influential roles, including Director of the European Green Capital Cities Secretariat for DG Environment at the European Commission, member of the European Green Capital Award Expert Evaluation Panel for the Commission, Project Director for the Irish-Scottish Links Energy Study jointly for the three governments of Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, lecturer in civil engineering at University College Dublin, President of UCD Engineering Graduates Association, President of Engineers Ireland, member of the Engineering and Computer Science Committee of the Royal Irish Academy, and chair of the Academy's Climate Action Conference Working Group. In September 2020, PJ was appointed Chairman of Innovation and Digital Adoption at the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, leading the implementation of a 7-point priority agenda of productivity reform in the Irish construction industry, including setting up a construction technology centre, a national BIM Centre of Excellence, and implementing modern methods of construction. In December 2020, he was appointed an independent non-executive director of Codima, Dublin's energy agency, which is owned by the 4 Dublin local authorities, Dublin City, Fingal, South Dublin, and O'Leary-Rathdown. Codima is the body responsible for implementing energy efficiency and low carbon renewable district heating in the Dublin region, and in addition supporting the work of the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland in the Midwest region of counties Meath, Kildare and Wicklow. PJ.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith and Susan, and good morning, good afternoon all. I was to join with Orla and Caroline in your warm welcome to Rachel here to Dublin this morning, give her address to the Republic of Ireland members of ICE. Rachel, I am also very happy to join with Susan in responding to your very graphic and inspiring words. I think it is no exaggeration that I cannot personally remember an ICE president's visit to Dublin, and I've seen many of them, that was more keenly awaited than yours here today, albeit virtually. This is because we hugely admired and welcomed what you had to say on climate change and indeed climate action last November, when you were installed as president of ICE, and if I'm to believe Wikipedia, as the youngest ever ICE president, an achievement which I think speaks for itself. You correctly tell us that we cannot now build our way out of climate change. It's too late for that. Therefore, we have to instead drive climate action by cutting our greenhouse gas emissions, and then build our climate resilience in whatever mitigation and adaptation measures we can manage to achieve in the next 10 years, probably the next 10 years that are available to us. In developing future infrastructure options, we need no longer to rely purely on economic factors to make investment decisions, but to increasingly take full stock also of sustainability aspects of our policies and projects. We should not be surprised that our younger generation, who are most interested in the effects of climate, as it is they who in future will experience its worst effects in future years. Our own annual Engineers Ireland State of Ireland Report 2020, published last autumn, was called Engineering a Green and Digital Recovery. In 2020, we got a new government who are committed to a climate action plan to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. That will be a huge challenge on which we engineers must now lead. As Susan pointed out earlier, our government is also now legally required to implement and not exceed prescribed sectoral carbon budgets set under the revised climate action plan to be published shortly. Susan, in her response, has referred to the particular challenges of the concrete industry and how it should be overcome. And that's only one material in the industry. As part of an overall national development plan, the Irish government intend to spend some 165 billion on necessary housing and infrastructure by 2030. Caroline, as Engineers Ireland Director General, is a member of the construction-led construction sector group to help deliver the National Development Plan and Project Ireland 2040, a plan to prepare Ireland to accommodate another 1 million people on our island by 2040. A year ago, I was appointed as chair of the CSG subgroup on innovation and digital adoption. And so I am very committed to tangible climate action. The three pillars of this work are digitization, productivity, and sustainability. Part of our sustainability challenge is to embed circular economy principles in the construction industry. This innovative and highly practical concept of circular economy was created, as you probably know, by a young English sailor who had sailed around the world. Her name is Ella MacArthur. This circular economy is now the bedrock of EU and I think global waste management policy, including the management of the growing quantities of construction and demolition waste we produce in the building and engineering industry. A particular need in our industry also is to upskill and reskill our workforce and to attract greater female participation in what is becoming a very attractive industry. Engineers Ireland share that commitment too, as you can see. In fact, including Orla, two of our most recent presidents have been female, and our Director General has been female too. Overall, on our project, the Innovation Digital Adoption subgroup, we have around 100 engineers, builders, architects, environmental scientists, surveyors, and BIM specialists working on the delivery of key priority actions with sustainability across cutting action, and greatly informed by a sustainability consultative group with 17 members drawn from all the professions in the construction industry, including Susan, who was here this morning. And they are looking at all possible decarbonisation issues in the construction industry, and we really look forward to their report. In terms of projects, these priority actions will lead to the next generation of construction in Ireland, including the introduction of modern methods of construction, a construction technology centre, and a 5-year Build Digit project, which will deal with carbon and sustainability up to 6D, 6 dimensions, level 6, and level 7 or 7D on long-term life cycle asset management. We're also benchmarking our future construction vision internationally against 5 countries: the UK, both England and Scotland, Denmark, Norway, Canada, and Singapore. In all of this endeavour, we cannot forget the substantial challenges we face in reaching net zero carbon, but we have to begin, and we have to begin now. Having that common goal, as you say, must unite us all as engineers as we seek to cut our carbon emissions and achieve carbon neutrality by the middle of this century. So thank you very much, Rachel, for taking the time to address us and come to us virtually today. I wish you continued success for your period short period left as ICE president, but even more so in your future career, which, as you say, is still only half over. So thank you very much.
Thank you, PJ, and thank you again, Rachel. Rachel, may I take this opportunity on behalf of the members of the Institution of Civil Engineers based here in the Republic of Ireland to thank you for taking the time to share your vision with us today. You've been a truly inspirational president. You've given us all, engineers of all disciplines, not just civil engineers, a clear challenge to look at ourselves and ask what we as individuals can do to make a real contribution to carbon reduction and to reverse the harm done by us and previous generations of engineers. Your approach has been transformational, and I thank you sincerely for that. Thank you, Orla, Susan, and PJ for your valuable contributions to today's discussion. They're very much appreciated. And finally, I would like to thank Engineers Ireland, Orla and Caroline, for hosting this event. We may not have been able to meet in person this year, but this is a very important event in our calendar. And it's great that we were able to harness the technology to create an event that is the next best thing to our usual meeting in Clyde Road, without the bites and pints to go with it, of course. And on that subject, special thanks are due to Maureen Nyangasa, who has worked tirelessly behind the scenes, setting up the event, making sure that it's all gone so smoothly for us today. And with that, I'll hand you back to Caroline to close the meeting.
Thank you very much, Keith. And just to echo your thanks to Rachel in particular for delivering such a fantastic address, and one I think that will generate a lot of continued discussion. And Rachel, just I suppose, you know, you're becoming towards the end of your presidential term, but perhaps we might be fortunate enough to meet with you in London next year, because traditionally the Engineers Ireland president does deliver his or her address in London, and so hopefully our paths will cross again. But just to say that we absolutely will continue to collaborate on those shared items with your colleagues in the Republic of Ireland branch. So again, to echo thanks to Keith for devising all of the aspects of this event. It's been fantastic, Keith, and to my colleague Maureen for all of the background work that was done as well. Rachel, I was really delighted to see your reference in the chat function there to part 2 of your film coming out. So we look forward to seeing Shaping 02, and I'm sure you and your colleagues will let us know when that's going to be published. So thank you very much to all of the people who came on to the call this afternoon, and for taking time out to be with us. And of course, if there's anything that we can do to follow up on this event, we'd be very pleased to do that. So I wish you all the very best, and Rachel in particular, I wish you the very best, and thank you again, and good afternoon, everyone.